not the hash chain-based the Lamport one-time password. So it's a different approach. Essentially, in the device, actually, we implement a so-called like pseudo-random generator. So the pseudo-random generator has a secret seed and also a clock. So basically, we use the seed and the clock to generate the pseudo-random sequence. And the bank also has the same seed and a synchronized clock. The bank and device, they have the same random seed and a synchronized clock. Then they will generate synchronized like a random sequence. So that random sequence is the one-time password you use. So it's not the Lamport one-time password. So for the real banking system, we use this hardware token. For the Lamport one-time password, we don't need hardware. So, but of course, the limitation is that you can only log in n times. But for the banking system, we use hardware token. You don't have any limitation on the number of logins. Okay, so we will also for assignment 1. So the hash function is MD5, but you can use any free source code you can find. But make sure you use the correct version. All right. So if you use Java, probably you can just call the library to do MD5. If you use the C++, so maybe you need to find some open source implementation of MD5. But you need to check. You do some testing. Okay. So you hash some string using the code you find, and then you compare it against some website that provide MD5 hash. So you make sure you use the correct version of the MD5. Okay, so the next topic we will look at is access control. So this is another major component. So we will spend probably this lecture, half lecture, and the next lecture to go through all the content. So we will look at some concepts, some models, so some basic concepts and some models. And after that, we will look at some practical examples. For example, how we do the access control in Windows and Unix systems. So that part, those practical materials, in general, they are not covered in the exam. So just for your information, right? So I will go through those parts quickly. And also, there is an announcement. So after this class, there will be an information session for the internship. So after the class, I will probably finish at about 3. So after finishing the class, you stay here because someone will come to brief you about the internship. I don't know the detail, but I was told that there will be an information session, right? Okay, so we will look at the access control. So what is access control? So this is different from authentication. Authentication is to identify who the user is, right? So that's to make sure we are connecting to the correct user. And access control is to determine what the user can do, right? So also in general, we will have both systems, and then many people actually they will just combine these two implicitly. So when they say access authentication, or they say authorization, or they say access control, many people actually implicitly they implicitly contain all those, include all those components. But in general, the concepts are still different. So authentication is to identify the user, and access control is to determine what the user can do. So whether we deny or allow the access. Okay. So the two sentences actually are different. So if we look at these are the two sentences, statements that can basically that covers authentication and access control. So the first sentence says this file can be accessed by an authenticated user. Essentially, this means that this is a public file that can be accessed by all the internal users. The second one, this file can only be accessed by an authorized user. So in this case, maybe only one user is allowed to access this file. For example, the password file and the shadow file. So the password file actually can be read by all the users in the system. That means as far as you can log in the machine, for example, the Banshee server, you can read the password file to find the accounts for all the users. So in this case, actually, only authentication is needed. Once the user authenticated, the user can read that file. However, so for the shadow file, only the root user can read the file. So other users, they try to read the shadow file, the access will be denied, right? So to give you another scenario, for example, if you go to like some place like Legoland or Disneyland, so if let's say that the park is all the facilities are free for all the users, then here we only need authentication, right? So once you purchase a ticket, you you enter the park, you can play all the facilities. So in this case, we only need authentication. But say now actually we have some specials like facilities, games, only for VIP users. Now we have authentication and access control. All the users can enter the park because they all have valid tickets, but only the people holding the VIP ticket can play these special VIP games, right? So in this case, if we have a second scenario, we have both authentication and access control. All the users can enter, but only some of them can play the VIP games. So that's basically the difference between authentication and access control. So authentication means we basically an authenticated user is an anonymous user. We know who the user is, and access control is our authorization. Whether we allow or deny the access to a particular resource. So the resource here can be a file, can be a program, whether someone can execute a program, whether someone can read a file or write a file, right? Whether someone can create a new file. So all these permissions will be determined by the system which implements the access control. Right. So another question. So do we always need both authentication and access control? So is there any situation we only need one of them? So there are situations we only need maybe authentication. So the example I mentioned, right? So if say the park only provides all the games for free for all the users, for all the clients with a valid ticket, then we only need authentication. But if you want to have specific games or facilities for a specific set of users, then we need to have both authentication and access control. Right, so this is basically the overall structure. So we have the initiator. So basically, this is someone who wants to access resource. So later, actually, we will call this kind of entities subject, right? And then we also have the target. These are the resources that will be accessed by the initiator. And then later, we will actually see we call them objects. So usually we say subject, access, objects. And then we will have this authority. So this authority will basically be part of the operating system. And then this authority will determine whether this access is granted or denied. Okay, so that's the overall picture of access control. For the access control information, so what kind of information can be used to define the permissions? So actually we can use different information. For example, we can use the identity of an individual user. So each user may have an individual unique ID. Or we can use the groups. For example, all of you are in the group of UOW students, and I'm in the group of UOW staff. So we can determine the access based on individual IDs, or we can based on their group ID. So in Unix, actually, later you'll see, each user belongs to one group or multiple groups. And then the access control can be done based on your individual ID or your group ID. Okay. And then we can also have security labels. So this will be used in, for example, military applications. For example, we can have top secret, secret, confidential, unclassified. So the files can be attached with different labels. Someone can access the top secret, but someone can only access, for example, unclassified document. So we can attach the labels to determine the access. And then we can also have roles, right? So you can have managers, programmers, CEOs and so on. So we can list on the rows to also define the access. So all this information actually can be used to define the access control policy. And then the access control policy basically contains the rules, like who can do what, when. So you define the rules, right? So who can read file 1, who can write file 2, and so on. And then the authority is the entity that will enforce the policy. So the authority basically will make a decision whether the access is denied or not based on the policy, the rules. So in general, we will look at some typical examples of access control policy. So how to define the policy based on the information, and what are the principles or mechanisms that can be used to define the policies. So now let's look at some formal definitions. So we call the entities that want to use resource or access resource as subjects. Right? So for example, the subject can be a user. You want to read a file. Then in this case, you are a subject, the file is object. So object is the entity that will be accessed. And you want to execute a program. In this case, you are the subject, the program is object. On the other hand, so say you invoke a program. In this case, you are the subject, the program is object, but the program may try to read or write another file. In this case, the program becomes a subject, and the file becomes object. So that means one entity can be both subject and object, depending on the scenario. So you can have overlap. So the one entity can be both subject and object in different scenarios. Okay, so basically this is similar to the picture in the previous slide. So we have a subject who want to access object, and then we have the reference monitor. This is basically the authority. Authority will implement the policy, the rules. So basically the rules will determine whether a subject can access the object or not. So it's quite straightforward definition. So one approach we use actually is a so-called access control matrix. So the matrix again is a very straightforward data structure. So basically in the matrix we define all the subjects and all objects. So we have the we have the labels for the rows and the labels for the columns. For example, the rows can be subject, columns can be objects. So in this case, each cell in the matrix, each entry will determine whether the subject can access the object or not. And we can have different actions in each cell. For example, user 1 can read file 1, user 1 can also write file 1, but the user 1 cannot access file 2, and so on. So this is a very straightforward representation of the policy. Right? So we use a matrix. And then there are some alternative representation of the matrix, and we will look at some of them. In particular, we will look at the ACL, access control list. That's one very important representation of the ACM. Okay, so as I said, we can have different subjects and objects in different systems. In the OS operating systems, we have users, processes, groups, and so on. And then for the objects, we can have files, processes, memory, and so on. So here, the process can be both subject and object, because a user may invoke a process, may create a process. And the process, in this case, process is object. But the process may try to read a file. In this case, process becomes a subject. So we have multiple, we have some entity which is both the subject and object in a system. So in databases, we can also have the subjects, which are the users, and objects, which are the relations, which means the tables. So in relational database, we have the tables for the relations and so on. Right, so this is one very simple example. So we can have all the subjects here listed in the rows, and then all the objects here. So you can define process 1 can read file 1, Bob can write file 1, Alice cannot do anything for file 1, but Alice can read file 2, and so on. So you can have a simple, you can use a matrix to define all these permissions right? So this is quite straightforward. So, okay, so however, so the one challenge in access control is to handle the dynamics. But in this subject, so all the contents related to the dynamic, like change of the system, is just for your information. So in the exam, you will not find any question related to the dynamic part of the access control, but you need to remember that in reality, actually dynamics is a very complicated and very difficult issue to address. Because when we deal with dynamics, we need to handle, for example, the concurrency. Right? So the dynamics can apply to the system state. It can also apply to the access policy. Because someone may change the access policy when other people are like accessing the files. For example, Alice is reading file 1, but now the owner of file 1 or the root user want to revoke this permission. That means the root user or the owner of the file want to remove the read capability, the permission from Alice. But Alice currently is reading the file. So in this case, what should we do? So of course you can have different ways. So the first way is that you can deny the request by the administrator. That means you still allow Alice to read. The second way is you immediately disallow Alice to read. So in this case, we need to handle these kind of situations. And this, there is one model. The first model that handles dynamics is this one. So, but as I said, you don't need to worry about the dynamics. So we can basically use a state machine approach to handle this dynamics. So we will essentially treat the system as a state machine. So you will have one state, and then you will have a transition. You transit from the system state will transit from like one state to the next state. For example, when someone tries to revoke the permission, you have one state to another state. Or someone creates a new file. If you create a new file, you need to add new entries in the ACM. So now again, you have all the states. You transit to the new state. Right? So this is how we handle dynamics. We use a state machine approach. So you can use this kind of command to change the ACM. For example, you can construct an object or subject. Then in this case, you need to add new entries into the ACM. And then you can also change the permission. For example, you can add reading permission for Alice, for Paul. You can remove the writing permission for Bob, for file 2, and so on. So you can use all these commands. Right? So these are some pseudocode that actually illustrate all these commands. But as I said, actually you don't need to worry because we won't look at this in the exam. However, so here actually there is one important principle. So in system security there are a few important principles, right? So here one of the important principles is the principle of attenuation. That means you can grant the permission only when you have the permission. So if you don't have that permission, you are not allowed to grant that permission to another person. So this is quite straightforward. In particular, like in Unix, if you want to grant permission for a file, say you want someone to run this file, or read this file, or write this file, then the user who can do this, grant this permission must be the owner of the file or the administrator, that means the root user. So in Unix, so only the root user or the owner of the file actually can change permission. Other users, they cannot change permission for object. So this is basically the principle of attenuation. So as I mentioned, so a subject cannot grant right to other subject unless this subject has that right. Okay, so and as I mentioned before, so in the dynamics situation, when we handle dynamics, there can be very complicated issues. So for example, to handle concurrency and so on. So, but we will not go to the details of the dynamic access control. Okay, so the ACM is very simple, but the ACM has a drawback. So the matrix can be very sparse. That means the matrix may only contain very few items. A lot of cells are empty. So in this case, we can create two subviews of the matrix. So you can create a subview from the subject perspective, or you can create a subview from the object's perspective. So if we create a subview of the ACM from the object's perspective, we have the ACL, access control list. So this is a common term that you will find in many white papers, technical reports, and so on. So ACL basically represents the permissions or the access control from the object perspective. So you define for each object what are the subjects that can access this object and what are the permissions. For example, for file F, you can define A can write to this file, B can read to this file, and so on. So in this case, you don't need to, in the ACM, you may have a lot of empty cells in the matrix, right? But in this case, for the ACL, you don't need to put those empty entries here. You only list the entries, subjects and actions that are allowed for this particular file, right? So this is one example. And then this is from the viewpoint of the object. So of course we can also do the similar treatment when we treat the, we try to look at the ACM from the viewpoint of a subject, right? So for example, you can define for Alice, Alice can read file 1, write file 2, and so on. So you can define basically the permissions based on either the object perspective or the subject perspective. Right, so basically this is like an example. So the ACL basically will, for each object, now we attach ACL. So later we will see actually in Windows and in Unix, each file will have an ACL. So the ACL will determine, will tell who can do what to this file, right? So you can have actually ACL defined based on the individual identity, or you can define ACL based on the group ID or the rows. So actually the ACL can be defined based on different information, either the user's unique ID or the rows or groups and so on. Right? So you can basically determine for subject 1 what's the permission, for subject 2 what's the permission, and so on. Right? So something like this. Right? So for file F, you can use the user ID. Alice owns this file. Alice can read and write this file. And then Bob can read this file, and so on. So as I said, in Unix, only the owner or the root user, which is same as the administrator in Windows, so only the root user and the owner can change the permission, can change the ACL. Other people cannot change the content of the ACL. Okay, so this is another example to illustrate this concept. And now, basically, we can determine the ACL. So based on the ID, also based on the group, right? So if anyone who belongs to a team, then they can do some permission. So this is an example from the Unix. So if you go to the Unix, you list all the objects, all the files. So in the Unix, we have directories, folders. So if you have a D here, that means it's a directory. So if you have a dash here, that means it's a file. If you have an A here, L here, it means it's a logical link, just like a shortcut in the Windows. So it's a link to another object. So it's not a physical object, but it's a link. Right? So now you have these are the files. These are the files, and then you can also have these are the permissions. Who can do what? Right? So I will explain later. And then these are the owners and the owners group, where the owner belongs to, right? Okay, so in Unix we have read, write, and execute, right? So here usually you will see read, write, and execute. Read, write, execute. Read, write, execute. Read, write, execute. Right? But sometimes you may see some special symbol. We will look at these special symbol later. So what do they mean? But at this moment, you assume we only consider read, write, and execute. These are three commands. And the three commands are defined for three groups of users. So the first three items, read, write, and execute, they represent the permission of the owner, what the owner can do. So the owner can read, write, or execute a particular file. And the second is what the owner's group can do. So for all the people in the same group as owner, what they can do. The third one is what the universe can do, the rest of the user can do. Right? So as I said, for the, if you can imagine, for the shadow file or the password file, for the password file, actually the root user can do anything. But the group and others, they can only have read. They cannot have write or execute. But for the shadow file, now the root can do read, write, and execute. But actually, we may not need execute because it's a file, it's not a program. But for the others, they will have an empty, so they cannot do anything for the shadow file. Okay, so we can actually represent the permissions using the numbers, right? So, for example, if we have permission 744, that means sometimes actually you can find, actually we use numbers to represent permissions. So each number will be a number from 0 to 7. 7 will represent, so this, if you have 7, it represents read, write, execute, right? So if you have 4, actually it means only read. So in general, if the user is allowed to read, if the read, this flag is true, that means the user is permitted to read, you will contribute 4. If the user is allowed to write, then this flag will contribute 2. If the user is allowed to execute, it will contribute 1. So now basically we can use a unique number to represent the permission. For example, from 0 to 7. If you have 7, you can do a read, write, execute, because it's 4 plus 2 plus 1. So for 7, the only combination is 4 plus 2 plus 1. That means 4 means you can read, 2 means you can write, 1 means you can execute. If you have 6, 6 means that you can read and write, because 6 can only have 4 plus 2, right? We only have 1 to 4. Additional information about the permission. But anyway, you don't need to, so this part is something extra. So you only need to know that actually we can use numbers to represent the permissions. From 0 to 7, each number will represent a unique pattern, combination for the permission. Alright, so that's ACL for the capability. So this is from the perspective of the subject. So in capability-based system, it's something like a ticket. So basically, if you can access a particular object, then you have so in the ticket, it will tell what are the permissions for this particular user, right? So, for example, you obtain a ticket which says you can read file 1, write file 2, execute file 3, and so on. So in this case, basically you present this ticket, then the this reference monitor will check. If the ticket says you are allowed to access file 1, then it will allow you to read file 1. Right? So this is a capability-based system. So the concept is simple. So but here we need to make sure the ticket is unforgeable. Right? So we need to make sure the ticket cannot be forged by anyone, because if the ticket can be forged, then even if I cannot access file 1, I can forge a ticket, and then I can access file 1. So in this case, we need to use some cryptographic mechanism to make sure the ticket is unforgeable. Alright, so something we can use, for example, we can use digital signature or message authentication code. So in this case, basically when you present a ticket, the reference monitor or the authority can check this ticket is valid. That means that it's not forged by a user. In this case, we can ensure that the access control will be enforced. because the ticket basically can only be generated by, for example, by the system like administrator. Okay. I don't know why the lights are suddenly on. Okay, so this is capability. This is basically a capability-based system. So in this case, we just check whether we need to first check whether this ticket, like the crypto part, like the signature or the authentication code, is correct. If it's correct, that means this is a valid ticket. Then we can, based on ticket, we can determine whether its access is denied or granted. Right, so we can have the viewpoint from the subject. We can also have the viewpoint from the object. Then you may ask, how about the viewpoint from action? So is it meaningful or useful to define the another representation from the viewpoint of action? Say right or say read. We can say Alice file 1, Bob file 2, and so on. And then write, you can have another list. So do you think this is a meaningful or useful representation? So besides the object and subject viewpoint, should we also define the viewpoint from the actions? So read, write, execute, and so on. No. Because
you have to store a lot of information, duplicate information.
Sorry?
You have to store, it requires a lot of memory to keep track of it.
So for each permission, actually you can have a very long list.
Yeah.
Right? So if you want to search that list, it may be not efficient, because if you only have read, write, execute, then basically you only have 3 like the list. So and each list you have a lot of items. So it's not really that. So it's not commonly used. Actually, capability-based is also not very widely used because it depends on the number of users. If you have only one user in the system, then the ticket need to contain the whole list of permissions. But the ACL is widely used because we have a lot of objects. Each object we can define the access, and then in that case, actually, it's more efficient to determine the right for a particular user corresponding to this object. So actually, the action-based is not really that useful compared with the other two. And compared with the other two, actually ACL is also more useful in terms of the implementation of the policy. And then there is a different version of the ACM as well. So this is the so-called authorization table. So this is basically a table which contains only the, it's similar as the ACM, but we remove all the empty cells. Basically, we just put all the triplet user, subject, object, action, we put in a table. So in this case, we don't have empty cells. But now, actually, we can determine the ACL by sorting the table. If we sort the table according to the object, then we get ACL, because all the objects, for the same object, then if you sort the table according to objects, then basically you group all the entries by the objects. In this case, you have the ACL. And if you sort the subjects, then you have the groups of the permissions based on the subjects. You have that capability. So this is another way to implement this access control. Right. So if we look at this picture, it illustrates the summary. It gives a brief summary about this ACM or ACL-based approach. So basically, we have the subject who will access objects, and then we have the access control authority, or the so-called reference monitor. And the reference monitor will enforce the policy defined by ACM. And then we can have two different ways, two different views of the ACM. One is the access control list. That's the perspective of the ACM from the, that's the object from the object perspective of the ACM, and then we also have the capability, which is the view of the ACM based on the subjects. So this is just a brief summary. And in the access control, actually in the systems, we don't usually implement one policy. We can have multiple policies enforced. So the ACM, this approach actually is a so-called discretionary access control. Basically, the user or the owner can control the access. When you create a file, if you are the owner of the file or you are the administrator, you can specify. You can change the permission. Right? So this is called a discretionary access control. That means the owner of the file actually can control the permission. And then, in general, we can have both. So discretionary access control and also the so-called mandatory access control. Mandatory access control is now no longer controlled by the user. So these are the rules controlled by the system. Right? So in this case, even if you create a file, so you can describe the discretionary access control part, but you cannot modify the mandatory access control part. So later we will see, for example, in military application, we have the so-called multi-level access control, and this is an example of a mandatory access control. So the multi-level, just like the example I mentioned, you can have top secret, secret, classified, confidential, unclassified. So the level actually is you can have levels, one dominate another. Top secret dominate secret, secret dominate confidential, and so on. So in this case, for example, you create, say you are like a chief officer. You create a file with top secret. So in this case, although you are the owner, you create the file. You can also specify who can access this file, but on top of that, we will also have mandatory access control. For example, if a user can only access, say, confidential information, so even the owner of the file with top secret wants to grant the access, then the user still cannot access because the system will deny this access. Because the mandatory access control is not determined by the owner of the file or the users. It's determined by the system, right? So in this case, we can basically prevent like leakage of like sensitive information, right? So we will look at some examples later when we look at the multi-level access control. So we will look at how this can be done, right? So for the mandatory or for this discretionary access control, basically, actually we can determine the policy based on different information, right? So we can determine who can do what. So based on the context, right? So you can use the identity of the user, and you can also have some like intermediate control layers. For example, you can use a user group, or you can determine the role of the user. Based on the role of the user, you can determine the permission. So you can put all the users in different groups. For example, all of you are in a group of students, right? And then we can determine the permission based on these intermediate layers. So this will allow the management of the policy to be done more easily, right? So this will simplify the management. So we will look at some of the approaches used to use the intermediate control layers to do the permission, access control. So the first one is the most straightforward one, is the group-based access control. We can group the users, right? So in this case, we can now define the policy based on the groups, right? So here is a simple example to illustrate the idea. For example, you can put user one, subject 1, subject 2, subject 3 in one group. And now, basically, you can determine the permission for the objects based on the group, like the group ID instead of the user ID. So in this case, you don't need to put in the ACL, S1, S2, S3, you can simply put group 1. Now all the users in group 1, all the users with group ID G1, they can access this object. However, sometimes there can be conflict. In this case, for example, so the one, like in the ACL, there may be one entry saying group 1 can read object 1. But on the other hand, it says subject 1 cannot read object 1. So later we will see, actually, in the like in Windows, we can define both the allow permission and the deny permission. That means we can specify who is allowed, and we can also specify who is denied to read or write a file. So in this case, actually, we can have sometimes we can have a conflict. So this one is like an exception. All the users in group 1 can access object 1 now except S1, because S1 is not allowed to access object 1. Of course, so we can have two options here. So we can have the like a default allow or default deny, right? So because the T1 is allowed to access O1 and S1 is in T1. On the other hand, we explicitly say S1 is not allowed to access O1. So there are two approaches. One is a more like a liberal approach. That means if anyone says allow, any part of the policy says allow, I allow this person to access. Another one is a more like a conservative approach. If anyone says deny, I deny. So basically in the security, we usually implement the default deny. That means so if there is conflict, one policy says allow, one policy says deny, we follow the deny policy. And then by default, say if there is no policy specified, then we always deny. So that's the default deny policy. So that this is a principle. This is another important principle. We actually need to we will see in different topics. Default deny. By default, if it's unclear, it's ambiguous, it's undefined, then by default we deny. Right? So that's the default deny principle for security. And then the previous case we group the users or the subjects. Then actually we can also group the objects, and also we can also group the actions. Right? So if we group the actions, actually we have this so-called privilege-based access control. So privilege basically is something related to the action. For example, whether you can open a port, like you have different applications, you have different port numbers. Whether you can open a port to allow communication, or whether you are allowed to configure a particular system file, and so on. So we can, based on the operations, to define the privilege. And then, now basically we can assign the privilege to different subjects. Right, so this is, the structure looks similar, but it's just a different, grouping. So whether you group the users or you group the actions, or you can group the objects as well. Right, so you can group, say, all the images in one group. You can group all the executable files in one group, and then you can specify what are the permissions for each group of objects. So the grouping actually can be done based on subjects, objects, or actions. So in this case, actually, we can have different types of grouping, and then to extend this. So the privilege is a term usually used in administration, like system administration or networking or operating systems and so on. But the idea of this privilege-based grouping can be extended or generalized. So if we generalize this concept, then we have the so-called role-based access control. So this is a quite widely used access control mechanism. So basically now we assign the roles to different users, right? So in the different applications, we can have different roles. And the advantage of using the role-based access control is actually we can determine, for example, we can define some mechanisms that allow us to manage. So compare with the previous groupings, this may allow us to manage the access control even more easily. So, for example, we can define the inheritance. So, if user A has a particular role, then user A can inherit all the permissions of another role. So, this is one example how we can use the role-based access control to simplify the management. So if we look at the example in the banking scenario, so we can have different roles, and each role will have different permissions, right? So in the operating system, we use the term privilege, but in this case, actually, we don't call them privilege. So we call them like the actions. So basically, we can, if we use role-based, it's it can cover more like a broader range of applications. So in the banking scenario, for example, the teller can have different actions, right? And the manager can, here you can see the advantage I mentioned. So manage basically will have all the permissions as a teller, but may also have some additional permission. So in this case, actually we have the so-called inheritance. So in this case, you don't need to repeat all the actions that can be done by the teller for the manager, because the manager will inherit all the actions, all the permissions of the teller. So in this case, we can even we can simplify this management of policy better, in an even better way. Okay, so the customers, they may also have some permissions. System admin, auditor, they can have different permissions. So the role-based access control, basically, we can assign basically the rights based on the roles instead of now the individual user IDs, right? So based on the role assigned to the user, we can determine whether the user is allowed to perform a particular action or not. And one single user may be assigned multiple roles, and the multiple users can be assigned to a single role. All right. So, however, we can have sometimes we still need to have a restriction. So, because, for example, if a single user is assigned multiple roles, sometimes there can be problem, right? So, if the two roles actually they are contradictory, so then we should have some restriction that does not allow these two roles with contradictory requirement to be assigned to the single user. Okay, so basically for the role-based access control, so the base model includes association between the roles and the permissions, and then we can also do the extensions. So for example, we can define a hierarchy. The hierarchy can be corresponding to the hierarchy of the organization. So given the organization, you can assign roles to different users based on the organization's structure, right? So in this case, we can define the inheritance. And then for the constraints, actually, sometimes when we assign different roles to the same user, we really need to define some constraints. For example, the mutually exclusive constraint, the cardinality constraint, and the prerequisite constraint, and so on. Right, so this is the base model. That means we assign permissions based on the roles instead of the individual users. Then based on this role-based model, we can have a hierarchy. This will define the inheritance. Some role may inherit the permission of another role. And then we can also have the constraints, right? So this is a second extension. And then we can also have a consolidated model, which will have capture all the models below this consolidated model. Okay, so the role hierarchy. So this is the first extension. This is very, very straightforward. So we can have now the use of we can use the concept of inheritance. So for example, this is the structure of a department or a company or an organization. In this case, we can assign roles. Basically, we can use role-based access control corresponding to this hierarchy or the structure of the company, right? So in this case, for example, the director now basically will inherit all the permissions of the project leader. Project leader will inherit all the permissions of the engineer and so on. So you can have the concept of inheritance implemented in this role-based access control. So in this case, so you only need to specify, for example, what are the unique permissions for the director, and then basically based on the project leader's permission, you can now get all the permissions of the director, because the director will inherit all the permission of the project leader. For the constraints, this is the second extension, so we can have some constraints. In particular, we can have the mutually exclusive constraint. So in this case, if say two rows or multiple rows, they are contradictory to each other. For example, here, if we assign the purchasing manager and the account payable manager to the same person, then this person can cheat. There can be fraud, right? So in this case, we need to avoid this kind of role assignment. That means that these two roles, they are contradictory. So we should apply this mutual exclusive principle to separate the roles. So we don't assign these two roles to the same user to avoid fraud, right? And then the cardinality, we can specify the maximum number of roles that can be assigned to a user, or the multiple number of users that can be assigned to a particular role, and so on, right? And the prerequisite is another constraint, possible constraint. For example, a user can be assigned a role only when it has some other roles. So this is opposite to the mutually exclusive. Mutually exclusive means that if you assign this role, you cannot be assigned another role. On the other situation, maybe if you want to have this second row, you first need to have the first row. So these two actually, they are opposite to each other, right? So we can have all these constraints. So this picture illustrates the consolidated model, which includes the basic one, the inheritance, this row hierarchy, and then also the constraints. Right. So this is this picture is somehow similar to the UML diagrams, probably you study in other subjects, right? So we can have many-to-many or one-to-many relation. So if you have one arrow here, that means one. If you have two arrows here, means many, right? So for example, one user can be assigned multiple rows. One row can be assigned to multiple users. And then you can have the row hierarchy, right? Permission assignment, and so on. So you can also have the constraints. For example, when you assign the rows, you can have constraints. You can have the mutually exclusive constraint, or you can have the cardinality constraint, and so on. All right, and then you can also in this picture we also have the concept of session, right? So you can have multiple sessions, and each session you will assign. You can have different roles assigned to a particular user. So this is basically like a picture to illustrate the consolidated model, which captures the basic one, the row hierarchy, and also the constraint, right? So it's somehow similar to other diagrams we studied in other subjects, right? So that's row-based access control, and then we can also do the access control based on the so-called protection rings. So this actually is also used in operating system. Right, so in this case, actually we assign basically different permissions to different entities in the system. So in this case, for example, we can assign. So now 0 actually has basically the highest privilege. 1 has the lower high privilege than 0, and 2 have an even lower privilege. 3 have the lowest privilege. So if you look at the content, entities. So the 0 means the OS kernel, 1 means OS, 2 means utilities, 3 means the user processes. So how does this protection works? It works in the following way. When the user wants to access some resource, for example, some critical resources, so actually the user is not allowed to directly access the resource. What the user need to do is, for example, in your user program, you need to call a utility function. Then the utility function will be invoked, and then the utility function basically now will call the OS function. OS function will call the OS kernel function. And then the OS kernel will determine, for example, whether you are granted to take the resource. So if you are granted, for example, the camera, whether you are allowed to enable the camera, right? So in this case, the OS kernel will tell the decision to the OS will tell the decision to the utility function. Utility will tell the result to the user process. Then the user will be notified by the user program. So the reason of using this ring is to prevent user from directly accessing some critical resource. Because if the user is allowed to directly manipulate or modify the resource, then this sometimes can cause damage to the system. But if we do this ring-based approach, then basically the request will be passed according to the structure of the ring. So eventually, only the OS kernel will do the critical function. The user cannot do the critical function. So if you have some illegal operation, it will be stopped either in the utility part or the OS part or the OS kernel part. So each time when you move to an inner ring, actually, basically you are moving, you can satisfy all the requirements of different departments. So we start with the single one, and then we look at the multiple domains later. Right, so the multiple domain one is called the so-called multilateral access control. Right. So for the multi-level policies, they are widely used in like military organizations or banks. So we will look at some examples. One is for single domain. That means we only look at one column. And then the other case we'll look at multi-domain, which will have which can capture like multiple departments or multiple units of an organization. Right, so for the sensitivity level, we can define like a top secret, secreted, confidential, unclassified, and so on. So these are the typical labels that can be defined for the sensitivity of object. Okay, probably I will just stop here. So that's some general idea. So we can. Okay, let's start the lecture. So we will continue the access control topic. Today we will probably finish all the materials in this topic. So we will look at a few models defined for like different types of access control policy. So we will look at so yesterday actually we looked at some access control models. So like the role-based access control, like a protection ring and so on. So today we will start with this model, which is the so-called BLP model, Bell-Lactura model, which is a multi-level access control model. So in this case, we have security labels. So if you remember, for multi-level access control, so each subject or object will be attached with a label. So the label essentially will define the level. So which one is higher, which one is lower. So we will start with BLP, which is relatively like simpler than other models, because in BLP we only consider one dimension. So we have like well-defined labels associated with the labels. For example, top secret will dominate. That means is higher than secret. Secret will dominate confidential. Confidential will dominate unclassified. So we have a very like a clearly defined levels. So this is in like a single domain or one dimension. Later we will look at a more complex model, actually, which so model will consider the multi-dimension. So we don't only consider like a one domain or one column or one dimension. We can have multiple dimensions, right? So each dimension you can have your own like a sequence of levels, right? Then we need to consider the whole like access control based on different dimensions. So that's you can treat that as an extension of the single dimension case. So we will start with this simple one where we only consider the multi-level access control in a single dimension. That means we have well-defined labels determining the like the levels, which one is high, which one is low, and so on. So this kind of model is useful when we have a system that will be concurrently used by multiple users, and we have multiple objects within the system. So different objects, they have different levels, and also different users who want to access the system also have different levels. So we need such kind of model only when we have this kind of system like that allow concurrent access of the by multiple users for multiple objects. Okay, so this model is to ensure the confidentiality. So later you will see actually the security goal is important in defining the security policies. So if we have confidentiality, that means we want to prevent disclosure of sensitive information. So in this case, we can have some rules. And then if we want to prevent, protect integrity, that means if we want to make sure data cannot be, if we don't care about the secrecy of the data, but we want to make sure the data will not be illegally modified, then the rules will be completely different. So when we define the policy, so you need to first make sure you clearly understand what is your security goal. Because we have confidentiality, integrity, availability and so on. So for different security goals, actually you will have different policies. Right, so for BLP, this is a confidentiality model. That means that we want to ensure sensitive information cannot be accessed by unauthorized user. So we want to protect the secrecy or confidentiality of the data. But we don't worry about the integrity of data. We want to only make sure the data cannot be accessed by unauthorized users. Right, so similar as the ACM, we have a set of objects and we have a set of subjects. So now we will attach the labels to those objects and subjects. Right, so you can attach, for example, top secret to file 1, secret to file 2, and so on. So subjects will also have their clearance level. So you can also have top secret. So that means the subject actually can access top secret document, and then you can also have secret, confidential, and so on. And the operations considered in BLP includes the execute, read, write, and append. Right. So basically here the execute here is to execute the program. Read is to read the file, and then write is to actually write here means read and write. Write means that you can modify. And then there is a particular, a special type of write, which is append. So we separate this append from write. So later, be careful when you see the term write. So you need to make sure it means modification, or it means you just append. Append means basically you have a file. For example, you have a secret file, top secret file. So some low rank staff or officer, they may not be able to read or write the file, but they may be allowed to append data at the end of the file. For example, you have a log. You cannot see the log of produced by other people, but you can append an additional entry at the end of the log. So this is the meaning of append. So in this case, actually, sometimes we actually allow, for example, a low rank officer to append data to a file. Also, this officer is not allowed to read other content or modify other content of the file, but the officer can report something by appending record in the file. So this is why we introduce this append, because the BLP model is used in military applications, governments, and so on. So if say I want to report something to my officer, so I can append something to a file. Also, I cannot see the content or modify the content. I can append something at the end of the file. So that's why we introduce this append. So make sure you understand the difference between write and append. Write means that you can modify the existing content. Append means that this is a special type of write. You can only add content at the end of the file. Right. So now if we have this kind of, basically this is these are the information we will use to define our policy, define our model. And then for the multi-level, of course, we need to determine the order of the level. Right, so as I said, in the single domain or single dimension case, this is quite straightforward. You can define a clear set of the levels with different strengths. Right, so you can say top secret is the highest, then unclassified is the lowest. So you can have a very clear order. And later, when we look at multi-dimension, then we will revisit this order again. And now, basically, in the multi-dimensional case, this order is no longer that straightforward. So we will look at this later. So, but for the single dimension case, actually the order is relatively more straightforward. So we just have like one column. We don't have multiple columns. Okay. So the BLP basically is based on, so if the access control policy is defined based on the so-called system state. So this is similar as like a system state we look at when we talk about like access control matrix and so on. So basically, in the system state, it contains the current access set. That means who is doing what to a particular object, right? So, and then we also have the access control matrix. That means this is basically a discretionary access control. So if you still remember, yesterday we mentioned that we can have both discretionary access control and the mandatory access control. So in this case, in BLP, the discretionary access control is still done by using the ACM. That means the owner of the file or the object can still specify the access of other users. However, on top of that, so we will also define the levels. So we will now add some additional restriction, which is based on the levels of the objects and the levels of the subjects. So in particular, we define the level for the objects. And then for the subjects, actually we have two different levels. One is the default clearance. So one is the default like security level. We call it a clearance for the subject. And then another one is the current security clearance or security level. So we require the current level must be less than or equal to the default level. So that means you can assign a lower level clearance to a subject. So lower than the default level, right? So that's the level function. So basically, the ACM is for discretionary access control, but this level function is for mandatory access control. Basically, we want to enforce the security. So here we want to enforce basically the access control will be following the security level of the subjects and the objects. Right, so we also have a hierarchy. So this hierarchy basically will determine which level is high, which level is low. So in the in this BLP model, actually the hierarchy is quite simple. You can simply use a tree to represent hierarchy. Right, so, but in the multilateral model, it becomes a so-called lattice. So it's a multi-dimensional data structure. So in this case, it's still quite simple because we only have one dimension. Right, so for the two rules related to the levels of the subjects and the objects are no read up, no write down. Okay, so these are the two rules defined by the BLP. So we have the ACM, which is for discretionary access control, and on top of that, we have an additional restriction for the access, which is based on this rule. Right, so the rule says no read up, no write down. Okay, so no read up is quite straightforward. A lower rank officer cannot read objects or data with higher level. So because we want to ensure confidentiality. So if you have a top secret file, we don't want the lower rank officer to read that file. No read up. You cannot read up the object with a higher level. So that's straightforward. No write down. So this may not be that intuitive or straightforward. So no write down basically means a higher rank officer cannot write to a low level file. Right? So why this is also important? Because if the higher rank officer can read, say you have a top secret like a level officer, the officer actually can read top secret document. However, if we allow this top secret level officer to write to a lower level document, say an unclassified document, then actually there is a path that the information can flow from high level to low level. Because information can be first read by the officer, and the officer may mistakenly write something into the low-level file. So in this case, we have a pass from high-level file to the low-level file. So that's why we need to enforce this no write down, right? So here write, pay attention. So here write means the write and or append. So you cannot write or append, right? So do you understand the logic? So no read up, you cannot read the high-level document. That's straightforward. No write down, basically we want to prevent the high-rank officer who can read high-level document from writing something into the low-level file. So that's why we have no read up, no write down. Essentially, we want to prevent data, the information from flowing from high level to low level. If there is any chance the information can flow from high level to low level, we prevent this kind of possibility. So that's why we have no read up, no write down. So can you understand the logic behind? Yes? For these two rules, can you understand logic? Why we need to have this, right? So here, basically, then you may ask, does it mean I can write up, right? So here, if you want to write up, actually the write is not the real write. The write is append. So if that means actually if the low rank officer, if this officer want to append some data to the high level document, then actually this is allowed. So here, no write up does not really mean you can write up. You can only append up. So if you want to really write, you want to modify, then you must have the same level. So this is basically some remark you need to pay attention. And then basically we will determine whether the user can read or write a file by looking at the level of the subject and the level of the object. Right? So here are some remarks. So for the no read up, it's quite straightforward. If you have the user has a lower level, you cannot read down. But for the no write down, so here the write, actually if you have a higher level, the user has a higher level, user cannot write or append to lower level document. But for the write up, we need to pay attention. So here write up, if you have lower level, the user has a lower level than object, then you can append. So append in this case actually is allowed if you have the subject has a lower level than object. But if you really want to read and write, that means you want to modify the content of the file. So if there are some existing record in a log file, you want to modify those content, then you must have the same level. You must have the same level, right? So here you need to pay attention. So we allow write up. Here write actually means append. That means we allow append up, but we don't allow write down. So we allow append up. We don't allow append or write down, but we allow append up. If you really want to write, then you need to have the same level. So this is basically the policy or the rule associated with the write operation. Right. So we have basically the two rules. In general, we can summarize the two rules as no read up, no write down. But you need to pay attention, right? It does not mean you can actually write up. You can only append to up level. Because if you append to up level, it doesn't matter, right? You can report to your officer, high rank officer, something by append the data into a high level document. All right. So say if basically if say we have in the system state, if all the subject objects they follow this rule, we say the system is in a secure state, right? Regarding this read, and if you have the system state which contains if all the subject objects they follow also this rule, then we also say the system is secure with regards to the write operation. Right, so if say you want to have the whole system to be secure, then you need to have all the subjects and objects following the rule corresponding to the read operation and the rule corresponding to the write operation. Right, so these are the two mandatory rules. And then of course we also have the discretionary rule. That means only when the owner of the object allows the subject to access, then the subject will access. So essentially, we have two mandatory rules regarding read and write, and then we have one discretionary rule regarding also the read-write for the objects like owned by different users. So when we say a system is secure, that means the system is in a secure state if and only if all the rules are followed. So basically we need to make sure in the current system state there is no violation of any rule. Any rule is not violated by any subject or objects in the system, then we say the system is in a secure state. Then actually what we need to ensure is when you do transition. For example, if you are in a secure state, that means all the rules, including the mandatory rules, discretionary rules, they are all satisfied by the current system state. Then we need to make sure when we do a transition to the next state, the secure state will not be affected. That means that the next state will still remain secure. So that is what we want to achieve. We want to make sure the system always remains in a secure state. That means that all the access rules are enforced in the system state. So later we will see some more information about how to prove, for example, a system is in a secure state. Essentially, you need to prove if the system is secure in the I state, then for any possible transition, the I+1 state will still remain secure. If you can prove that, and then you have an initial state which is secure, that means your system will always remain in the secure state. Right? So this is some method we can use to prove, for example, a system will be secure, always secure. So in general, for the BLP, we have the two mandatory rules: no read up, no write up, and then also the discretionary rule, which is defined by the ACM. So, alright. So if we look at the example here, it may give you some clearer picture. So now let's look at let's just ignore the discretionary rule. We just look at the mandatory rule, right? So we have the labels. So because we are in a single dimension, so the labels are well defined. We have a very strict order of the labels. Top secret is higher than secret. Secret is higher than confidential. Confidential is higher than unclassified. So we have a very strict order, right? So this is one dimension, right? So it's simple. And we have different users. They are attached with different security labels, and there's also the files which are attached also with different labels. Right. So if we look at this table, so if we just look at the mandatory access control policy. So in this case, basically here we have the CAM and CAL. They cannot read personal file because this will be if we allow them to read the personal file. This is a read up, but we don't allow read up, so they are not allowed to read the files with higher level, right? So TAM and SAM and CAM can all read activity log because TAM is higher than this activity log, so TAM can read the log. SAM is also higher, SAM can read. CAM has the same level, so CAM can also read, right? So you can read down, or you can read file at the same level, but you cannot read out, right? So the CAM and the TOM cannot write to the activity log file because this will be a write down, right? So if you allow these two people to write to this activity log, essentially you create a path from high level to low level because they can read the content in high level document, for example, personal file. If you allow them to write to low level file, actually there is a path from this high level to low level because they can read the content here and then they may mistakenly put some confidential information in a low level. So in this case, the information from high level can flow to low level. So this should be prevented. So we don't allow CAM or TOM to write to a lower level, right? So this is, as I said, these two rules are associated with the security goal of confidentiality. we don't want the sensitive information to be disclosed to unauthorized user. Right? So the no read up, no write up, these two rules are associated with confidentiality. Right? For integrity, later we'll see the rules can be changed, can be totally different. Alright, so then it's the UMA and the UNA can write to the activity log. Alright, so here basically you need to pay attention. When I say write, so actually I'm talking about a pen, right? I'm talking about a pen. So this write means a pen. In the exam or in the assignment, so if I want to ask you something about this BLP, I will make it very clear whether I'm talking about write or pen. But here, when we say write, it's a pen. So they can append content to the log file, but actually they cannot read the existing content. They cannot modify the existing content. They can only append. They can only append to this log file. All right. So here, write means only append, but they can actually read and write. They can really modify this phone list. So because they are at the same level, right? So if you want to have both read and write permission, you must have the same level as the object. So this is an example without considering the discretionary access control. But in general, we need to have both. We need to have both. That means the mandatory access control must be enforced by the system.